It's been over 24 hours since the New York Giants ownership made their big decision regarding head coach Brian Daboll and general manager Joe Schoen. But is ownership going on blind faith or do they really believe in these two? I'll tell you what I mean coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And we've got a lot of writing that we're doing over there. And as always, welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, it's been over 24 hours since general manager Joe Schoen, head coach Brian Daboll learned that they will be back for a fourth season with the New York Giants. And, there was a lot of information that came out between, what John Mara said, what Shane said, what Daboll said, and it was a lot to digest. So I spent a good part of last night and today before taping this show just kind of going through everything and just really thinking about what was said, intentions and all that stuff. And is ownership really believing in these two, or are they going on blind faith? So we'll discuss that to start the show. Then in segment 2, they wouldn't do this, would they? I'll tell you what I'm talking about coming up in segment 2. I think this is a topic that, needs to be discussed because I could see it happening, believe it or not. And I'll tell you what it is and why. And then, of course, we will wrap things up in segment 3 with a few coaching musings. Who stays, who goes, and might the Giants come calling for a familiar face who I think a lot of you probably by now know who I'm talking about. So we'll talk about that in segment 3. So that's today's show. As always, thank you again for tuning in. All right. I want to start off with this whole concept of blind faith. Now, John Mara, Steve Tisch, they were presented with a plan from Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. And apparently the plan sounded good enough because both men are going to be back in 2024. But here's where maybe I'm questioning whether John Mara believes in it, all right, or if he had to maybe talk himself into believing it. Listening to John talk to the media, going back, playing back the tape, watching the video, because I like to look at body language and all that stuff, reading the transcript. I don't know about you guys, but it sure sounded to me like John was conflicted when he spoke to the media and explained the decision to keep Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll. Now, for what it's worth, I think, I could see the logic in keeping them. I don't disagree with the logic, but here's where maybe it gets a little sticky, right? John, as you guys know, was around the team. I don't think he was working for the team at the time, but he was certainly around when his father had to make a decision on Bill Parcells back in the day. And, Bill Parcells came pretty close to being replaced after one bad season by John's father, Wellington. In more modern times, John was now working with the team. His father had passed on. John had assumed, his father's mantle. And they came close to dumping Tom Coughlin, right? And John, of course, was part of that decision and ultimately decided to stay with Tom Coughlin. And we know the outcome with the Giants having stuck with Bill Parcells, having stuck with Tom Coughlin. And I'm not saying that Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen are the next George Young, Ernie Accorsi, and or Bill Parcells and Tom Coughlin. They've got a lot to prove before they even get there. So I just got the impression that maybe John was going on an instinct. And, a lot of times we have to trust our gut feeling. But when you've been burned so many times, as John has with, Pat Shermer and then, or actually before Pat, Ben McAdoo, Pat Shermer, Joe Judge, sometimes it's fair to wonder if your gut is telling you the right thing. So when listening to John speak to the media, he sure sounded conflicted. All right. He mentioned that he believes that his instinct is that the team is going in the right direction. Okay, great. If you believe that, then how can you sit there and say that you're not sure that the roster is better than what they inherited in 2022? How can you sit there and say, that the decisions and the processes are things you believe in, but yet say that we stunk? All right. There was contradiction in what John had to say. And, the one big thing that I think I took away from it is I almost got the impression that John was like, okay, what's the lesser of the evils here? Do we make a change and rip everything up and start all over from scratch? Do I have the patience to go through that again? Or do I take the lesser of the evils, which is to stay with Shane and Daboll? And John, of course, mentioned that, look, we've done this before where we've ripped everything up and we started from scratch. And it's like taking one step forward, two steps back, right? Is that really the way to operate? I'm not so sure it is. Now, both John and Joe Shane said that this is not any kind of Hail Mary. And Joe Shane in particular said, this is not a Hail Mary. He's not going to go out there and spend, wildly on free agents and be reckless and whatnot in the building of the roster on this mulligan that he's been granted. But I don't know, folks. In a way, it feels like that's what it is. And, obviously it remains to be seen what Joe does, what his plan is, what Brian's plan is for the coaching staff and for fixing some of the processes that haven't worked. All right, such as him calling the plays, for example. But it just feels like, you wanted to, for me at any rate, I wanted to come away knowing that there was confidence moving forward. And I think to a degree, John, and I don't know about Steve Tisch because he didn't talk, but John Mara, I think to a degree, believes that Joe Shane and Brian Daboll are the guys to get this fixed. And, if he didn't, he wouldn't have brought them back, obviously. But there sure was a lot of doubt, I thought, in what John said, a lot of contradiction. And when you have that, it's fair to wonder, okay, was John, what was he really thinking? You know, was he thinking, I'm 70 years old. I don't want to have to go through this again where I have to hire a new coach, a new GM. John spoke about his patience running out. Just a lot of contradiction, folks. Now, let's hope that the decision is the right one, that Shane and Daboll can turn it around. The elements are there. They've got a lot of cap space to get free agent help, and they need it in certain areas, which, we'll do another show on that. I'll give you my complete building plan for the Giants. They have a decent enough draft slot if they want to take a quarterback in the draft, assuming one is there. I'm not, well, I'll talk about that a little bit more in the next segment. Spoiler alert. They can fix this. But as has been the case for the franchise on the field all year long, when I have constantly said to you that this team is not good enough to overcome its mistakes, There is a very, very razor thin margin of error for Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll this year, right? They've been given this mulligan. You can argue whether they deserve it or not. They've gotten it. They can't make mistakes. And I think we can all agree that in the first, few years, they have made mistakes that have hurt this franchise, that have set this franchise back. That cannot happen if they are to continue, if we are to not be having this conversation this time next year. So we'll have to just wait and see how this unfolds. But to me, John Mara, I think, is flying on blind faith. I see the logic in bringing the two back. I don't necessarily, can sit here and say that I disagree with it. I see both sides of the argument, which is what I usually try to do. And we will see how it works out, hopefully for the better. All right, coming up next, they wouldn't do this, would they? What am I talking about? I'll tell you right after this. Hey, Giant fans, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the very same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey, Giant fans. So, if you're looking to join an exclusive community of Big Blue Faithful where you can discuss the team and its moves and receive insider information in a toxic free environment, then you need to check out the Locked On Giants Blue Crew community. Now, you've heard me mention the Blue Crew at the start of every show. What that is, members get to join our by invitation only Discord channel where we can talk with one another, ask questions, get breaking news, and so much more. Plus, as part of the Locked On Giants Blue Crew, you get exclusive updates texted directly to your phone whenever there's breaking news. Try it for free for 14 days, and if you like it, you do nothing, and you can continue for just $4.99 a month. But right now, for a limited time only, after your 14-day trial, if you enter the promo code Blue Crew, you will save 50% off your first 2 months of membership. So instead of $4.99, it comes down to about $2 and some change. All right. So that promo code is Blue Crew, BLUECREW. For more information or to register, visit joinsubtext.com/LockedOnNYGiants. And again, that promo code is Blue Crew, which you can enter at the top of the page to take advantage of your 50% discount on your first 2 months. Check it out today. Would love to see you guys. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And yes, the Giants season's over, but we are still 5 days a week here on the Locked On Giants podcast. We will be 5 days a week going through to June, I believe. So there's a lot to cover. We've got a lot to cover. And obviously, we're waiting to see if there is any news on any coaching changes and whatnot. So we'll talk about all that stuff and anything that's, related to the Giants. We will talk about that with you here on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right. Now, the Giants wouldn't do this, right? They wouldn't be so stupid to go into this offseason and say, you know what? We're not drafting a quarterback, right? They wouldn't do that, right? Would they? Well, folks, they could. And here's why I say that. All right. Yes, the Giants need a franchise quarterback. Everybody can agree on that. If I were to run a poll and say, do the Giants need a franchise quarterback? I guarantee you 100% of the respondents would say yes. Now, here's the thing. Everybody is sitting here and saying that it's got to be one of Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders. I'm not so sure, folks, that that will be the case. And here's why I say that. The two teams drafting in front of the Giants, they could, they could make a move for one of those quarterbacks or both of those quarterbacks. They could be gone off the board. Now, personally speaking, I think Travis Hunter is going to be one of the first picks off the board, which is going to leave one of Sanders or Cam Ward for the Giants to pick. But here's the thing, and here's why last year I was really screaming for the Giants to draft a quarterback. The Giants cannot get into a situation where they settle. They can't sit here and say, oh, all right, well, if we don't get Shedeur Sanders, we'll be fine with Cam Ward. No, they have to be convinced that they can live with either Sanders or Ward and turn them into, what they need moving forward. If that doesn't happen, then here's the thing. The Giants, finding the next Eli Manning is going to be very difficult. Because quarterbacks, franchise quarterbacks, believe it or not, don't grow on trees. So could the Giants maybe say to themselves, all right, based on the intel we're getting, it looks like Tennessee might be taking Sanders, for example. It looks like Cleveland might be taking Ward, So could they say, all right, you know what? Why don't we either just take Travis Hunter if he is there? If he is not there, and our first choice of the quarterbacks, whether that be Sanders or Ward, and right now I don't know which way they're leaning or if they like both of them. I think it's Ward, but don't quote me on that. Early indications are they do like Cam Ward. But if Cam Ward is not there, then do you say, okay, Ward's off the board, Hunter is off the board, Sanders is on the board, but do we really want him, or does it pay for us at this point to trade down in the first round and just say, okay, you know what? We've got ourselves a bridge quarterback, whoever that might be, whether it's Jimmy G, whether it's Kirk Cousins, whether it's Justin Fields, whether it's Carson Wentz, whoever they end up getting as their bridge. Okay. Do they trade down with another team that maybe likes Shedeur Sanders? And do the Giants go and say, okay, you know what? We want a haul. You want to move up to number 3? You give us a draft haul that includes not only picks this year, but we want a number 1 pick next year. Here's why that's important and why that could be a realistic scenario. Because if the Giants can gather up draft capital, they will now have assets in the 2026 draft, which is supposed to be a little bit better for teams that need quarterbacks, to where if the Giants need to trade up to get the quarterback of their dreams, they can do so. All right? Now, obviously, it's going to depend on how the order stacks up and whatnot, but it's certainly a possibility. Okay? What I'm getting at is I don't necessarily think, even though the Giants need a franchise quarterback, I'm not disputing that. I'm not so sure that they're going to quote unquote shop hungry. All right. So if they say, we like Cam Ward, case closed. Cam Ward's off the board. Travis Hunter's off the board. I don't see them settling if they don't have full bloom love for Shedeur Sanders, right? There's a lot that can go on. There's a lot of, analysis that has to go on. Brian Daboll, now that, the season's over, he can get in front of these guys, spend time with them. There's going to do extensive scouting. I imagine they're going to be at pro days and all that good stuff. Obviously, you'll have the combine interviews and all that stuff. So, it is possible that they could come out and say, we could be happy with either, Ward or Sanders. But again, I could see a scenario where if the one guy they like out of the two, if they like one better than the other, and Travis Hunter is off the board, I can see a scenario where the Giants trade down and say, all right, you know what? We roll with a bridge guy for a year or two, We try again in 2026. Folks, at this point, you can't rule anything out. And I know logic is get a quarterback. I understand that. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I'm also saying that you've got to shop smartly. All right. Now, some of you will say, well, it doesn't matter, but they can't go wrong with either quarterback, but they've got to do the necessary homework. Because remember last year, how a lot of us were thinking, oh, JJ McCarthy, they really like this guy. Did they draft him when they had the chance? No, right? They didn't like him that much. If they liked him, they could have traded down if they wanted to get him. They didn't. They went with the receiver. So that's just something to keep an eye on as we go through these next few months and we follow, the rumors and the workouts and who comes in for a draft visit and who does what. But yeah, it's a very real possibility that maybe, just maybe, the Giants, depending on how the board falls, maybe they just roll with a bridge and they try again, you know, next year for their franchise quarterback. Maybe, this year they take a guy, on day 2 or day 3, take a flyer on him and just, use the draft picks to fill out the rest of the holes. Right? The Giants got the money to do it. So if they want to get, a bridge quarterback, they got the money to where they can get, a Kirk Cousins or a Jimmy G, right? They'll have enough money left over to where if they want to pursue a top flight cornerback, which they desperately need, by the way, they can do it. And then they can use the draft to fill in some of the other holes, I mean, they might even have enough money left over if they want to add, a veteran offensive lineman to the mix. So it is a possibility and one that we cannot rule out just yet. And we'll see. It's going to be interesting. So we'll keep that, in the back of our minds as we go through these next several weeks with the Giants. All right, coming up next, some thoughts about the coaching staff. Where might there be changes? And could a beloved member of the franchise's past be coming home as a possibility? We'll talk about it right after this. Hey, Giant fans, it's playoff time. And if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where Prize Picks comes in. If you love football and you want a chance to win real money while watching the games, Prize Picks is the place for you. With Prize Picks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a chance to win up to 1,000 times your money. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want to cash out quickly, Price Picks has you covered. And with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving the platform. It's so easy to use. The payouts are super fast, where you can get your money in as little as 15 minutes when your picks hit. Plus, the weekly promos like Taco Tuesday discounts add even more value to your lineups. And here's a special offer for our Locked On NFL listeners. Download the app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Prize Picks. Run your game. Hey, Giant fans, Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spendings, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. There's no more stressing about budgeting every month. So go on, cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. A couple more shows this week, and then we'll send you into the weekend. First weekend without Giant football, and after the season we've had, I don't know about you, but I'm looking forward to just being able to kick back and watch other teams play. For me, I'm pulling for Detroit all the way. Detroit, coached by Dan Campbell, former New York Giant player, long time ago. So, once a Giant, always a Giant. I'm rolling with Dan Campbell and the Lions. And speaking of once a Giant, always a Giant, for those who haven't heard, Antonio Pierce, the great Giants inside linebacker of the 2007 Super Bowl team, was relieved of his duties after one season, or actually a season and a half, with the Las Vegas Raiders. And right away, look, I feel for Antonio Pierce. The guy, I covered him, as you guys know, super smart guy, and I think he's an excellent coach. Unfortunately, out with the Raiders, um, didn't have a good quarterback situation, had some injury issues, and just, they decided to pull the plug on him after 1 year. So I wrote an article over on New York Giants on SI. Basically, should the Giants kick the tires on him, especially if they move on from defensive coordinator Shane Bowen? Now, as I record this, Shane Bowen is still the defensive coordinator. That could change by the time you listen to this. I don't know. But if it does change, should the Giants maybe think about bringing back Pierce? Now, I thought about this, and I think the world of AP. Like I said, super smart guy. I think he's somebody that the players would really relate to. Um, but here's the thing, folks. I think if you're Brian Daboll and you know you've got a mulligan this year and you're going to move on from Shane Bowen, you better bring in somebody who has a record of accomplishment at this level if you can. All right. Now, this is no disrespect to AP, but he wasn't a defensive coordinator at the NFL level. He went from basically being a linebackers coach to a head coach. He skipped that coordinator level. Could he be a good defensive coordinator? I suppose he could. But if you're Brian Daboll, do you say, okay, you know what? I'm going to roll the dice on a guy that's never done it before when my job is potentially on the line next year? Or are you going to go for a guy that maybe has a little bit more experience, maybe a guy that you've worked with before, like Matt Elberfluss, for example, the former Chicago Bears head coach, or maybe Lou Anarumo, who was fired by the Bengals? I think, as much as I would love to see AP back here in some capacity, I'm not so sure if the Giants move on from Bowen that that AP will be the guy. Might he get a courtesy interview? He might. But if you're Brian Daboll and you know you gotta show progress this next year, I don't know that you want to roll the dice on a guy that has never done it before. Now it's interesting because Mike Kafka has gotten two head coaching inquiries, one from the Bears, one from the Saints. I still would be surprised if Kafka is back next year. I know Brian has said that he'd like him back. I don't think that they'll hold him back if he has an opportunity to get another position. Okay? Now, there is a possibility that if Kafka does return, that he resumes as play caller. That would make the most sense if you are the Giants. So, in other words, you don't let Kafka leave unless he's getting a head coaching job somewhere else. He is under contract for one more year. And if, somebody calls and says, hey, we want to offer him, a lateral move, you block it if you're the Giants. And you say, especially if Daboll's going to give up the play calling, which let's hope he does. Give it back to Kafka because, look, 2022, the offense didn't look that bad. It struggled in 2023 because of the quarterback play, because of the injuries. Not Kafka's fault, but was it that much better for Daboll, who had the same circumstances pretty much? No, it wasn't. So, I could see a scenario where Kafka stays on and gets the play calling back. And quite honestly, I think that would be the best solution if you're the Giants. He knows the system. He's worked with Dable. And hopefully, like I said, a new quarterback might be coming in, whether it be a rookie or a young vet. So, and Kafka is a former quarterback, and I think that's something that you can't deny. Now, some of you have said, "Well, what about Davis Webb?" Davis Webb hasn't been an offensive coordinator either, but the difference here is that Davis Webb played in this system with Brian Daboll, so he does know it, and he's super smart, kind of like AP. But again, if you're if you're Brian Daboll and you realize that your job is on the line, do you really want to experiment or take a chance on a guy that's never done it before? Moreover, if you're Davis Webb, do you really want to leave Sean Payton out in Denver? I don't know. That would be a tough one for me if I were Davis Webb. As much as I would love to see him back with the Giants. I don't know that that would happen. So, from a coordinator perspective, I think you know I think Kafka could potentially stay unless he gets a head coaching offer, and it's going to be really hard, I think, for him. Um, when you don't call the plays and stuff. I mean, I think a lot of these teams are maybe basing it on what he did in 2022, and this is a "what have you done for me lately" type of business, and it's not Kafka's fault that the play calling was pulled from him, but you know, I'm not sure quite if he's quite ready to be head coaching material. I'm really not, but you know, doesn't matter what I think. It matters what the hiring teams think. Bowen. I've said all along that I didn't think his system fit the talent that they had. Now the argument for keeping him is, well, we're going to add to the talent. We're going to get you guys, Shane, that better fit what you want to do. That's where I'm a little fuzzy. I still think that maybe Dable goes in a different direction. I do think there will be at least one other assistant on the defensive side of the ball that may not be back. All right. We'll see what happens, but there's definitely going to be some kind of shakeup on the coaching ranks. I'm not quite sure where, but I would not be surprised. I mean, if I were to sit down and I were to go through and say, okay, where did they underperform? I guess you could probably figure it out. But certainly for Dable, the big thing going forward is, do you want to start over with new coordinators again? Kafka's been with him, so it's not like he would, it would be his second coordinator in 4 years. If Bowen, they move on from him, you're talking now his third defensive coordinator in as many years. So, do you go, like I said, with a guy from the outside? Do you maybe promote Andre Patterson, who has done, been a DC before? Do you go back to Jerome Henderson, who applied for the DC position last year before Bowen got it? A lot of options. And if you're Brian Daboll, it's a critical decision to make because you need somebody who can basically run that unit by himself without having his hand held and get the most out of the talent, which Bowen's system this year just wasn't able to do, even when he had a healthy defense. So we'll have to see how it plays out. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. As always, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here. It's appreciated, and I will see you again tomorrow.